unfortunately, we have enough evidence to prosecute him, and we are. The case against your sister is stronger. But I kind of want to give you that background. That's kind of the context we see this as. Like, this guy came in here and, again, I'm not making excuses for anyone, but kind of blew up this situation. Mm-hmm. And he did not care who died, mm-hmm. who got hurt. He did not care at all. And the other thing I'm going to tell you is your sister truly believes that everything she's done has been done in righteousness. I know. And I know I'm kind of using LDS speak.
Yeah.
It's 100%. That's my interpretation also.
Yeah.
I think she 100%
She believes it. Mm-hmm. Every once in a while, you'll see kind of a little crack in like a jail phone call. Or she'll...
Well, you've heard our conversations, so you know that I get that she's not fully aware of what she's really done.
Right.
Yeah. I don't think she is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say it this way. I think she knows what she's done.
She knew enough to lie to us about it.
Yeah, but the context under which it was done was this religious, just these ideas that are out there.
Hi, welcome to the Law and Crime Report. I am Bob Bianchi. I'll be hosting this show. This is involving the Daybell case where there are two victims, Chad and Lori. This was the prosecutor on that tape, the head prosecutor, the elected prosecutor that's in charge of this investigation, speaking to material witnesses, not knowing that surreptitiously, or that is not knowing that it was being recorded, is making statements to them that have become part of a huge legal motion in court. Let's listen to a little bit more.
I can say this because I am LDS, like no basis in the LDS faith. You said it in your phone call to her. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at. And but again, we're just really grateful for you coming in. And it's going to be hard to talk about these things.
Oh, yeah.
We know that. And they're going to be nice. Because obviously, you're not even a person of interest.
Yeah, we've had that conversation.
Yeah. And, but part of what we need to do is understand when you have a case like this, it's not like just like a meth case, like, oh, you had meth, no one cares who you are.
Yeah, there's no drugs, no alcohol. Yeah. It's just
but this case is we need to understand the context of who these people are.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of what they're going to be asking you about. Okay. And
I'll do my best.
Like I said, it won't be easy. Mm-hmm. I know it's going to be a hard interview for you. But
I was wondering if you would be willing to tell me, if you're able to tell me, if there's any progress in what you know about Tylee and her death. Is there any progress in her autopsy where you understand better?
All I can tell, well...
I mean, do you have a cause yet, or is it close to one?
She is at the FBI's state-of-the-art crime lab. Unfortunately, there's a lot of deceased bodies there that they're going through.
I'm sure.
And so we're not, we don't know really anymore yet. And we may never know due to the destruction of that body.
Okay, Rob Wood, prosecuting attorney, the head of the agency, speaking to material witnesses, and this motion that is filed in the court is to try to get him thrown off the case, arguing that he coerced, unduly influenced, coached, and intimidated witnesses, among other things. No better person can help us out with this than the executive producer at the Law and Crime Network, Cathy Russon, who knows all facts on all cases about all things, a real true crime aficionado. Cathy, I gotta rely on you for this, because tell our audience what's going on. Who are these people the prosecuting attorney is speaking to, who also have an attorney in the room, and what's going on during this hearing where they're trying to throw the prosecutor off the case?
Okay, so there's a lot to unwrap here. A few months ago in October of 2020, Rob Wood went to Arizona with what he says was an introductory meeting with Lori Vallow Daybell's sister, Summer Shiplett, and Zulema Pastinas, which was she was married to Lori's brother, Alex Cox, at the time of his death. Back up just a little bit. Alex Cox is who most of us believe did the actual killings on behalf of Chad and Lori. And what we are finding out a little bit more about that is probably what the prosecutor believes as well. Okay, so that's that. This particular 18-minute recording was just with Summer Shiplett, Lori's sister. Rob Wood says he went down there at the request of Summer's attorney, Garrett Smith, who is representing both ladies. Not that they're charged with anything, but they have representation, and that he was asked to go down and do an introductory, meet them and say hi, because they'll both probably be witnesses at the upcoming trials. Their attorney, Garrett Smith, that was representing Summer, that was there in the room with prosecutor Rob Wood, and Rob Wood did bring an investigator with him, so he wasn't there alone. He recorded this conversation. Now, Rob Wood says he had no knowledge of a recording. He had no idea. Garrett Smith testified, there he is right there in yesterday's hearing, that he said, well, I mean, I can't remember if I told him I was recording this conversation, but I just do that anyway. And Arizona's a one-party state, so there's nothing illegal about what he did. He recorded the conversation. Then Garrett Smith claims that it bothered him some things that Rob Wood said in that conversation, and so he decided to turn the recording over to Mark Means, Lori Vallow's attorney. And that's where this all came about. When Mark Means heard information on that tape, he filed a motion to disqualify prosecutor Rob Wood, saying that he unduly influenced, he coerced, manipulated material witnesses. That's what the hearing was about yesterday. It lasted all day long. Like you said, Rob Wood was there, represented he had his own attorney there. And then it was both defense, because Chad Daybell's defense came in and filed a like motion to disqualify. That's where we're at that's the background of what happened yesterday. Now that we can get into kind of the facts of what the defense says.
Yeah, so I mean, typically, I've talked about this before, Cathy. There is nothing wrong with a prosecuting attorney interviewing witnesses. In fact, you are not doing your due diligence if you don't do it. But there's rules of the road, and whether or not you're coercing a witness or not. Typically, Cathy, and I'm curious to see if the questioning in court is coming out this way, or the arguments. Typically, a judge is not going to take the draconian action of removing an attorney, but rather say to the defense, you are free to bring your arguments about coercion or witness intimidation before the jury, and they can weigh the credibility of those arguments. Are you hearing stuff like that in court?
Well, no, because the judge hasn't really spoken on it yet. So I will say where we ended yesterday was all the testimonies in, and it was too late in the day for closing arguments. They're going to do those tomorrow, and we will show those live on Law&crime Network, and then the judge will make a decision. We don't know if he'll make a decision on the spot or if he'll take time and do it in writing about whether the prosecutor stays on the case. But these are the things that we heard from the defense, and then we heard the 18-minute recording. Now, I will say, we do know from court documents there's more than one recording, because they talk about it in the plural. We only heard an 18-minute recording. Rob Wood filed an affidavit of his own in this case, saying that there was more to this conversation. Plus, he had a conversation with Zulema, and so he believes that this particular recording was either incomplete or edited. That's where we're at. So in this recording, he says things to Summer like, your sister, everybody that we've talked to said she was such a great mom. Something's happened here. Something is, wrong with your sister. And he said, I believe that Lori firmly believes everything she's done is righteous and in righteousness. And then he says, I know I'm using LDS speak. Now, why is this important? So LDS is another name for the Mormon Church, okay? That's what Lori and Chad are members, or were. I think they may have been excommunicated at this point. But they've taken their beliefs way further than that. Rob Wood is a member of the Mormon Church. Summer, the sister, is a member, okay? So it's very intertwined. So Rob Wood says to Summer, I'm also LDS, but Lori has gone way off the tracks here. This has nothing to do with it. The defense attorneys take that and say, he's trying to bring her into his inner circle by bringing his faith into this, by saying, basically, I'm the same as you. We believe the same, Summer. So everything I'm going to say and do to your sister in court must be true. That's sort of what this argument is from the defense attorney. Part of it.
Okay, Cathy, let's listen to a little bit more of this secret recording that is now been made public and is actually being argued in court.
I was going to ask you on the concealment, or not the concealment, but on the conspiracy to commit murder. What's the weight of that in terms of jail time? Is that a death penalty thing, or
It is a death penalty case in Idaho.
are you planning to ask for that for them, or do you not?
We
know
sure
yet?
hope we don't.
Okay.
A lot of that will depend on her.
Okay.
And it's that's not a decision, or that's a decision we don't make actually until usually after the case is filed.
Okay.
In Idaho, we have a couple months, because a lot of times you file it, it's out there on the table, and then oftentimes that's a big motivator for people to get together and talk and try and resolve it. And that's what we hope happens. I have no desire to do that. Plus, once you do that, it's endless appeals.
Yeah.
I don't think the other family wants it at all, because
It's
the
prolonged.
case just never resolves,
Yeah.
really, in a way. Just kind of, they appeal this and they appeal that, and it can go on forever. So we're sure hoping not to go down there. No, I'm not saying I won't. If we go to trial, I might, but we haven't made up our minds on that.
Okay.
But we don't want to. I can tell you that from the bottom of my heart.
Knowing her, if she comes out of this state and realizes the weight of it, she may prefer that. Honestly, I think about that all the time with her, just because of what she's been through. I'm just kidding.
Okay, Cathy, just do us a quick breakdown as to what they are currently charged with, what the bail is, and how did the defense present its case? I'm told they called a number of interesting witnesses.
Okay, so that what we just heard was also very interesting to those of us that have been following this case. Currently, Chad and Lori Daybell are only charged with conspiracy to cover up basically burying the children in Chad's yard, okay? Not that they did the actual burying, but the conspiracy, it's all about concealing evidence. It's not a big charge. The penalty is up to 5 years, but they're being held on $1 million bonds. And all of us that have been covering this case have speculated that there's been no murder charges yet because they don't need to be in a hurry because the two of them aren't going anywhere. They're sitting in jail. Well, Rob Wood says that basically to Summer in this recording. He says, I just want to let you know now, we are going to file conspiracy to commit murder charges against Chad and Lori. He says it played out like that. And he also says, we haven't been in a hurry because they're being held on high bonds on these other charges. So it is exactly what we've been assuming what was happening all along. Now, in that part of the recording, Summer says, if you file those charges, is that a death penalty? And he says, in Idaho, it is. Well, the defense attorneys have a problem with that part of it. They believe that he was trying to manipulate, coerce, influence the sister. What came out yesterday's hearing, the defense called 3 witnesses: Garrett Smith, the attorney that was representing Summer that did the secret recording, a forensic psychologist who talked about how you unduly influence witnesses, and a law professor from Idaho State who basically talked about how some of this could be construed as prosecutor misconduct during a trial in front of a jury. He used those words all the time, which isn't the case here. We don't know how this is going to all end up and how the judge is going to rule, but I will say the law experts we've had on our network and people that I've talked to don't think this is going to go anywhere, and they believe Rob Wood is going to stay on this case.
Cathy, was there anything that came out during the hearing to suggest that what prosecutor Rob Wood said was untruthful or deceitful?
No. Oh, and we will say this one more thing. Another thing they're complaining about is that Rob Wood disparaged Lori's attorney, Mark Means, to Summer by saying he's never tried a felony criminal case. That is true. That's not untrue. He has no experience in this. He's in over his head. He's basically saying things like that. And he was basically telling Summer, when we go to file these conspiracy to commit murder charges, Lori's going to end up with a new attorney because this guy can't handle it. Those, I am paraphrasing, but that is why Garrett Smith, the attorney for Summer, said he was disturbed that the prosecutor was demeaning the defense attorney like that, and that's why he sent the recording to Mark Means.
Wow, that is amazing. Now, I mean, if in fact that's true, he was speaking truth. And as a prosecutor, I can tell you, Cathy, we've talked about this a million times. You want to play the game with a really good lawyer because as a prosecutor, you don't want to win a murder conviction only to have it reversed or thrown out because of ineffective assistance of counsel. And one of the first questions they ask is, what experience level do you have with handling cases similar to the case that you tried here? Cathy Russon, executive producer at the Law and Crime Network, and all things good at the network. Thanks so much for being on. It was a pleasure. You're always the best.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay, guys, listen, we're going to take a quick break, but don't worry. I got 2 more guests coming up and a lot of great, interesting topics. We'll be right back.
Chief Schroeder is today initiating termination procedures against Louisville Metro Police Officer Brett Hankison. Unfortunately, due to a provision in state law that I very much would like to see changed, both the chief and I are precluded from talking about what brought us to this moment or even the timing of this decision. I know that you will have questions, and I'm sorry that I cannot answer them because of the state law, ARS Chapter 67C. 0.3261F.
That's a Louisville, Kentucky mayor basically indicating that 2 more police officers are fired with respect to the shooting death of Breonna Taylor, Detective Joshua Janes and Miles Cosgrove. We got 2 excellent guests to break this down and will be with us for the rest of the show. Holly Davis out of Austin, Texas, former assistant district attorney at the Kirker Davis law firm, handling family law, divorce, custody, child support, also business litigation and estate planning. Welcome, Holly.
Hi, Bob.
Hey. And then the famous Joseph Scott Morgan from Jacksonville State University, a forensic science degree from the National University. He's a board certified fellow of the American Board of Medical-Logical Death Investigations. We see him here at the Law and Crime Network all the time, and I love the title of his book. If you haven't got it, you got to get it and take a read. Blood Beneath My Feet. He's worked with medical examiners. It is my go-to guy, even off camera, when I have questions. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you, Bob.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you both. Okay, so we have a situation here where 2 of these guys were fired. Cosgrove was fired, and I quote, "The shots he fired were in 3 different directions, indicating you did not verify a threat or a threat acquisition. In other words, the evidence shows you fired wildly." Now, Joseph Scott Morgan, you are a forensic guy. Talk to us a little bit about what that specifically means. How do we break that down? And have you seen this in your career as a basis upon which to fire a police officer?
No, I don't know that I necessarily have, but I'm sure that they've done a very in-depth study relative to the trajectories, angle of deflection, all these sorts of things that we look at a crime scene, and also to see if this marries up, if you will, with their SOP. And their SOP is drilled in their head from the moment that they hit the door at the academy as young police officers until they exit their career. You have ongoing training about muzzle discipline and all these sorts of things. The question is, I think, at the end of the day, did some kind of a primal reaction take over with this fellow, and they have deemed this as that he just wildly fired, and not knowing what his target was. You know, one of the principles is you have to identify the target, and you're going to fire center mass. And of course, that's in a perfect world. I don't know that this was a static event. It was probably very fluid at the time, possibly dark, obviously, from what we've heard. So, in answer to your question, no, not just this piece have I seen end up in the termination of a police officer. Generally, it's going to be a combination of several things, a perfect storm, if you will.
Yeah, in Jersey, we have a program called Top Gun. It may be in other places as well, Holly. And it is amazing. They video record these situations that are as real life as you can make it without somebody getting hurt. And when they're in an active situation and that heart rate is going, we've had situations where somebody's standing with a gun right next to their head and they have no idea that the person's there because they have that tunnel vision. Holly, the other officer, James, was fired for being untruthful in securing the search warrant, failing to inform the judge with respect to certain issues with regard to the postal inspector. What is that about? number one, and talk to our audience about the importance of officers making sure that their information that they give the judge as secure search warrants is accurate and pristine. Obviously, a major thing for a police officer. And to have that kind of sloppiness, if in fact it's true, he was fired for it, that could come up in any other case where he could be cross-examined for potentially having lied to a court to get a warrant, no?
That's exactly right, Bob. As a society, we have the law enforcement arm, which is supposed to protect the people in the society. And part of the rules that the law enforcement have to follow is that they have to tell the truth when protecting society. Another rule that the law enforcement has to follow is that they will not murder society and will pursue their objectives without using deadly force when it's not necessary. And so one of the major issues here for this Detective Joshua James is that he was untruthful in an affidavit under oath as part of a search warrant. And you can't do that. When you are completing and executing a search warrant, you're giving the court information upon which the court is making an immediate and emergency determination as to whether or not that search warrant will be executed and whether or not that person's home and residence will be entered onto by law enforcement. And so when you're going through this process as a police officer, you cannot be a criminal in the act of being a police officer. You cannot tell a lie when you're completing this process. And so under this investigation, which appears to be very thorough, it is determined that this detective was untruthful. And this is a message. This is a message to other members of the police department, people in the academy, people in those training programs that you mentioned, Bob. You cannot tell a lie when you're executing these search warrants and when you're presenting what is supposed to be the truth to the court. And the society needs to trust the law enforcement. And as a part of that, law enforcement needs to follow the rules. And we're seeing how important these rules are throughout the course of history and what happened yesterday as well.
Right. Yep. I was on a task force with the Attorney General's office where they implemented a very strict rule that any cop that was found to have been lying gets stapled to every discovery from that point forward that goes out to defense attorneys, because credibility is always relevant of a witness at trial. And so defense attorneys were able to impair the credibility by saying you lied before and potentially lied now. It was a career ender because testifying as a police officer is a vital part of the function of the job. Guys, got to switch gears here. In the United Kingdom, a judge denies bail for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Holly, I want to go to you first on this real quick. There was an extradition proceeding that occurred before this, and the judge refused to extradite him to the United States, arguing that prisons in the United States would be too difficult for him because of his mental health and other health issues that he had. So that was a win for them. Nevertheless, the judge refused to give bail as the United States is appealing that decision from the judge. What do you make of all of this? Is the United States ever going to get their hands on Julian Assange?
I mean, he's slippery. He's been really tricky over the past few years. I think that it makes perfect sense that Julian Assange is not allowed out on bail anywhere, considering that he spent several years in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, hiding out and making it his palace in the middle of downtown London. So I think it makes perfect sense. I was not surprised when I learned that he was denied bail. This guy is going to do everything he can. And now, in light of the circumstances under the Trump administration, Julian Assange was pivotal and critical in the 2016 election issues surrounding Hillary Clinton. And so now more than ever, I don't think Julian Assange is ever going to be allowed to be out on bail. I think he's enemy number one for a lot of different groups and organizations. He's pursued by several countries for crimes allegedly committed there. So I think it makes perfect sense he's going to stay where he is, locked up tight, because so many people are wanting him to be transferred to their countries. And he has managed to avoid this prosecution and capture for years.
Joseph, your thoughts? I mean, there are some that say he's a hero. He was leaking documents that were classified documents, military documents, and other very important confidential cables, highly classified things. Some people thought that was amazing, and yet there's another group of people that says this kind of stuff cannot occur, that you're putting this stuff out on a platform because it's a national security disaster. What do you think about all this?
From an evidentiary standpoint, I think that he is the wellspring from which a lot of data flows. But he is essentially, many times he was not necessarily the initiator of the data. This data would come to him through various sources, and from an investigative standpoint, evidentiary standpoint, I think that that's why a lot of law enforcement agencies from around the world, in Europe and various other places, Australia, uh, they want him in order to validate what they might suspect and to dig deeper. You know, it's kind of like, you know, when you go into a drug ring and you get a mid-level person. Now, people would regard Mr. Assange as very high level, but just so that you understand, he's the faucet through which all of this other stuff flows. The headwaters are back behind and upstream. So that's what they're after here. That's what they want. And I think from a legal standpoint, and again, I'm not an attorney, I'm just an old death investigator, but I think about this and I think, how long can he be held? You know, for the rest of his life? Is he to be protected or is he incarcerated? And I think that's a big question. And that's a question that a lot of people would like an answer to, just to know what his status is going to be, because then you start to get into human rights issues. And so I would be very curious as to what his status is going to be moving forward.
Okay, guys. Kelsie Thomas, the Law and Crime Network covered this gavel to gavel in the death of her 5-year-old child, was put on trial for that. This is the Pajama case that we talked about, where she was found hanging by her pajamas in a closet. There's a major development in that case. We'll be talking about it on the other end of the break. See you in a minute.
In Chloe's last moments on this earth, she would fight for her life, staring at her own mother. She took her last breaths in her own bedroom, where her mother made sure she wasn't here today to tell her story about what she did that day. Afterwards, the defendant didn't know what to do. It was too late for Chloe, but she had to do something to save herself. She had to come up with a story. She had hours to think about this. She had to come up with a story that would explain the marks on Chloe's neck. Since she was the only one home besides her 2-year-old son, Phoenix, she had to make it look like an accident. She called 911 and said that she found her daughter hanging in the closet. She was hoping everyone would believe her, that they just wouldn't ask any questions. At that point, Chloe was already dead. Corey Binge told you he was the first responder and that when he went there, he felt her extremities and that they were already cold. He told you that he normally wouldn't have even done CPR or perform life-saving measures on somebody, but he did it desperately hoping that he could save Chloe's life or bring her back to life. But he told you she never had a pulse from when he went and started those life-saving measures.
So there is the prosecutor trying to convince a jury when this case originally started that the defendant, Kelsie Thomas, was guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, which would carry a life without parole sentence. Now, guys, I want to talk to you a little bit about how lawyers evaluate cases, especially prosecutors. You want the charge that you charge the person with the highest charge. Sometimes you don't get the highest charge. You may get something a little lower than that life without parole sentence. But what happened was the jury hung. They couldn't come to a decision. So the defense tactically made a maneuver that they were going to have a bench-only trial with the judge. And they presented the evidence, and the judge found her guilty only of manslaughter. So in other words, the judge is basically saying this was not a premeditated act, and the court ruled that the victim, the young girl, Chloe, 5 years old, was not behaving. The defendant was remorseful. The victim was accused of strangling and found hung in the closet, but yet she was sleep deprived and she wasn't thinking when the child was injured, and then gave a 5-year sentence on that case, a whoppingly significant, in my mind as a prosecutor, as a homicide prosecutor, I'd call that a loss as far as what they were looking for. But Joseph Scott Morgan, you know this case inside and out. You've been on national media outlets, on Law and Crime, talking about this case. Talk to us about the forensics of this, found hanging in the closet, because the judge at a certain point in time said that the confession that the defendant made was actually consistent with the evidence from the medical examiner, and that's right up your alley. What do you say about that?
Yeah, personal note, this is heartbreaking. This case, we followed it for a long time. I found it very interesting to just, you know, kind of dive into the forensics on this, the first responders' comments that the child was cold to the touch upon their arrival. And, this has all of the ingredients and the elements of what's referred to as a staged death. Now, it might have been an interrupted staging event, but at least it's implied. So when you have a first responder coming in, they're treating somebody in a manner in which they would not normally treat them. They're there to merely to save lives. And with kids in particular, I've had this happen many times. Even when children are very cold to the touch, I've even had cases where there's early signs of decomposition when it comes to children, and you have EMTs that go ahead and start CPR because they want to try to save a kid. That's just the nature of what they do. So in this, you lose evidence, you lose time. You've already lost a lot of time in a linear sense because the child has, she's gone down range so far that she's cold to the touch. And then you go to the inconsistencies with what you're looking for in a hanging. And much was made of this. And we have what's referred to as a tinting feature when you have a hanging. There you see Dr. Tom Young, who was in court for the defense. With tinting, you have a presentation, a marking on the neck that literally goes up. If folks at home will kind of move their hands up like this and come to an apex in the point, it's like an old pup tent. And so what happens is the weight of the body draws the body down and you get this kind of ligature mark that's right here. That's not what they found. It was inconsistent. It was an out and out strangulation with pajama pants.
Interesting. State would have been wise to hire you, my friend, to be there as an expert witness in that case, because I know that you were emotionally moved by it. Holly, I would have loved to have gotten to you about the tactical decision to go with the bench trial after the mistrial and the hung jury, but we've got to move on because we've got so much here at the Law&crime Network. You're first up with this next case. Lisa Montgomery, as you know, is scheduled to be executed. It's got a little bit of a torturous history here, but there was a back and forth in the last month or so with regard to whether they were going to actually go through with execution. This is a federal court case, and as you guys know, I've been talking about it a lot. There was a moratorium on federal executions, and then William Barr, the attorney general at the time, lifted that moratorium, and many executions have gone forward. Now, Lisa Montgomery is convicted of a horrible, Holly, heinous offense of ripping, literally cutting out an 8-month-old baby from the womb of a woman, killing her. It was as tragic as it can get. But the argument went here, Holly, that they want to stay the execution because they want to file a petition for clemency with President Trump. And there was a lot of antics going back and forth. But, Holly, I've tried death penalty cases as a prosecutor, okay? Full admission. But I've come to the point where I'm not in favor of the death penalty, and it's been for a while now, even as a prosecutor, because I've seen such inconsistencies with the manner in which it's applied, who's got the better lawyer. But look at this case. Literally days away could make the difference if whether she dies or she doesn't, because the Biden administration has said on day one, they're going to put that moratorium back into practice. What are your thoughts about all this?
I think the next 14 days, Bob, are going to be very, very interesting, and particularly with regard to death penalty cases. William Barr went about changing a 17-year precedent and immediately issued orders for the execution of several federal inmates on death row in succession. And despite the pleas from the country, from the attorneys, from the courts, from the judicial system, from state legislators, these executions occurred. One recently here in Texas. And so we can see that there is a last-minute Hail Mary pass on behalf of the Trump administration to proceed with as many executions as they can, despite the fact that there's been a moratorium on death penalty cases for 17 years. So what that tells me is that there is a high unlikelihood of this clemency request being granted in the waning days of Trump's presidency. So it'll be very interesting to see if President Trump yields to that plan that he had previously put in place through Bill Barr, or whether or not for some reason Trump would not pursue that and just put a hold on things until the Biden administration. But given some of the brazen acts and statements of President Trump in the past 48 hours, I find it, I'd be very, very shocked if this inmate was not executed as scheduled.
Well, Joseph, great points, Holly. There's also a pardons clemency office as part of the White House that typically are the ones that do this. It's very rare that the president is just unilaterally doing it. There could be many pardons that or clemency given. They're not asking she be released from jail. They're just asking that she be relieved from the sentence of death. And there could be things going on right now in the pardons office because she was abused apparently as a child. She had mental health illnesses, so on and so forth. And these lawyers who got COVID-19 in the middle of all this are saying, we want time to work out this clemency petition. They argue that clemency, because it was put into the Constitution, is a very important aspect, a critical aspect, they call it, of the criminal justice process. What do you think about all that? They're saying, let us play it all out, but we all know what that means. You play that clock out, that means she doesn't get executed.
Yeah, and I'm with you, Bob. I used to be a very vocal advocate for the death penalty based upon a lot of stuff I saw in my career. But as I've gotten a bit longer in the tooth and grayer in the hair, it's it's a bit more difficult for me to stomach. But with all of that said, there is a lot of trust me, the phone lines are hot, and it's not just for this case. There's probably a number of other cases out there where people are seeking clemency, and all at the end of every presidency, regardless of who occupies that seat, this happens. It happens over and over again. But yeah, when you're talking about the death penalty in a case like this, and Joe Biden has already stated that there will be a moratorium reinstituted. I can't see them pulling the trigger on this and moving forward with it.
Yeah, I mean, a matter of days can make the difference, and that's one of the many, many reasons that I saw as a death penalty prosecutor that it can be so arbitrary and random. And yet I understand how people feel with some horrific cases. Trust me, I've tried them. Long in the tooth and gray hair, I think you said that must be a Southern thing. What I like to say is paunchy and balding. That's since I've become paunchy or balding. All right, guys, great stuff. We got one more case that I want to talk to you about that's interesting. Hero or not. We're going to be talking about that on the other end of the break. All right, 25-year-old Isaac Wright was doing a thing that they called drifter shoots. I guess I'm, again, getting a little too old. He's an Army veteran. He's suspected of breaking into skyscrapers and landmarks to take daring and harrowing photos. Let's take a listen to Anjanette Levy's report on what this case is about, because an arrest of him has been made.
There's no dispute. The photos drifter shoots posts on social media are interesting, even breathtaking. But police say the way the photographer takes the photos is a crime.
He's using types of pry bars, lockpick mechanism sets. He's disabling security cameras, motion sensors. He's physically damaging buildings that he's entering and then going to the top of the building. And then the police are being notified.
Cincinnati Police Detective Jeff Ruberg started investigating drifter shoots in November after a security guard spotted a man with a backpack inside this office building, the Great American Tower. Police spent hours in the building with canines trying to find him.
He spent 8.5 hours in that building. He eluded the police and escaped on foot.
Police say they identified drifter shoots as this man, Isaac Wright. He was discharged from the Army last year and had attended SEER School, which stands for Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape. Ruberg says Wright's been traveling the country, taking risks when he climbs on bridges and onto the edge of skyscrapers to take photos.
We believe he has counter surveillance. We believe he has friends that will be on the ground if he's on a building, breaking into a building.
This video from New Orleans shows a man who appears to be Wright climbing a landmark. Police tracked Wright using license plate readers starting in Melbourne, Florida, then to New Orleans, Louisiana, where they missed him. Then it was on to Houston, Texas, cities in New Mexico, and finally to Winona, Arizona, where state troopers finally caught up with him on December 17th.
He kept catching a break every time we thought we were going to get to him. He was caught, finally. And that was only with the persistence of the Arizona Department of Public Safety.
Okay, so people love these pictures. I mean, honestly, it gets me nervous to even look at them because I don't even want to drive over a bridge, much less climb on one. Joseph, you know, he's kind of like a little bit of, I don't know why he's reminding me of Robin Hood. I mean, he's not stealing from anybody, but the police make a point. The point is in order for him to do this, he's damaged property, he's committed burglaries, he's got counter surveillance, so on and so forth. But yet he's kind of like a little bit of a local hero. He's an Army vet. What do you make of this whole case? I mean, I'm anticipating prosecutors are going to make a point, but not too big a point.
Yeah, well, he's going to be prosecuted in multiple locations, more than likely. I mean, my God, he's got photographic evidence of his violations, and I'm sure they did a good job of documenting the pry bar marks on doors and him disabling cameras and all this sort of thing. And it goes to a bigger issue. It's the safety of the people that are contained in those same structures. Look, I don't care about somebody that climbs on top of a building. Gravity will take care of things one way or another. It has a way of doing that. But what I do care about is the safety of the people in the buildings, and also what could this potentially compel some other person that doesn't have the same skill set as he does to do things similar to this, so that they can match. In this world that we live in now, people always have to best one another, particularly on social media.
Well, Holly, Joseph made what would be exactly an argument a prosecutor would be making with regard to the need for deterrence, because it could lead to otherwise tragic consequences. Luckily, it did not occur here. If you were prosecuting still and you were back in the day, what would be your outlook on the case in terms of, yeah, we got to punish it, we got to have deterrence, but by the same time, as I used to like to say to my assistant prosecutors, you don't always have to hit a fly with a sledgehammer. What are your thoughts about this case?
I think a prosecutor's time is precious. I think there are a lot of violent crimes out there that need to be investigated and addressed and presented to our juries. And so I think that I would have to look at parity. I would have to mete out the same type of punishment and charges that I had given to others who had done similar crimes. And so I think that we should expect no less than that. One thing that would not be fair is that just because his pictures are cool, we're not going to prosecute him just like we would anybody else breaking into a high security building or landmark. That would be inappropriate and unethical, especially in these times today, Bob, where people are looking at prosecutors and district attorneys and attorney generals and saying, why are you choosing to prosecute these criminals or these defendants as opposed to others? So I think parity would be driving all of my decisions if I were a prosecutor. And I do think that this guy is interesting. I mean, this is like Leonardo DiCaprio in To Catch a Thief. So I think that we need to keep that in mind as well, too, is that he's got a certain type of skill set that was beneficial to our armed forces at one point. So I think that there's a way that that could be tied into the whole thing. But nevertheless, this gentleman broke the law. And if other people are going to be arrested for doing things in office buildings and landmarks, just like we saw yesterday with the break into the Capitol, then I think we need to follow the same rules with regard to this gentleman.
Yeah, Joseph, I want to go a little bit of a Holly said a word that I love and said it over and over again, parity. And so our audience understands that's essentially making sure that from case to case and from courtroom to courtroom, that the sentences are the same from one place to the next, because you can see wildly disparate things when you don't have proper supervision of a prosecutorial agency if there's not that kind of parity and supervision. Joseph, real quick, we only have a short time left. What are your thoughts about that idea in your career about parity and the equality of sentences versus anybody gets to make a decision and it could be all over the lot?
Yeah, it could be, and particularly when you're considering multiple jurisdictions in a case like this. I heard Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, there's other places as well. So you're not gonna, it's an imperfect world, you're not gonna have that. My mind goes back to The Runaway Bride, where they charged her and made her pay for all of the overtime and everything those cops had to go through to put up with that nonsense. This guy's a nuisance.
Joseph. Yeah, payment may be a good option. Okay, guys, listen, we have to wrap the show. You were a great guest. That's it for me for the rest of the week. You can find me at Bianchi ESQ, and Happy New Year again.